the Americans left their evacuation dangerously late. 15 hours before Saigon surrendered, hundreds of Vietnamese besieged the embassy. A large number had been promised a seat out, but many were left behind. The helicopters in Operation Frequent Wind were heading for the American evacuation fleet lying off the coast of South Vietnam. Cobra gunships of the US Marines were supposed to protect the embassy. Dawn on the last day, with signal flares on the rooftop helipad. A final battle was raging at Ton Son Nhut Airport on the edge of the capital. But although the advancing communists could see the American evacuation, they didn't interfere. The last helicopter came in for a handful of US Marines, a humiliating end to the American presence. 1 mile away outside our hotel, the final disintegration of law and order was taking place. Groups of looters began straggling past with goods stolen from abandoned American quarters. We tried to show our neutrality, the fact that we were not Americans, by fixing a Union Jack to our hired car. Most Vietnamese were fully engaged in plunder. 10 minutes to 9 on the morning of the final American departure. The last Americans left the embassy complex about 25 minutes ago, and the fate of the embassy is very clear. It's now being systematically looted from floor to floor, and part of the building has been set on fire. Soon the looters had swept through the intestines of the embassy, and the titbits which caught their fancy lay outside. The Fire Brigade was one of the few functioning institutions with officers who had stayed at their jobs. In the chaos, the cavalcade of President Minh drove by to broadcast the surrender of South Vietnam. The frenzy of looting went on, as if Saigon's consumer-mad people were extracting their own brassy revenge from the Americans, safely steaming off in the evacuation fleet. A former GI appeared, distraught after 5 fruitless days looking for his Vietnamese wife. Last chopper's gone, I think.
Well, is there any other way we can get the hell out of here? Maybe I can travel with you guys or something.
We're staying down at the Caravel Hotel. There's some British correspondents
there. Then you can do me a favor.
But how come you missed the last chopper?
I was at these people's house. It was curfew. You understand?
Yeah.
No. I've got tickets for the 2 kids. I've got some, papers for these people.
They're Vietnamese?
They're Vietnamese, but they're with me, and it means a lot to some other Vietnamese people back home. Can you do me a favor? If I can stay with you guys and get these 2 children with me?
Yeah, sure. And got some money for the hotel and so on?
I'll get somebody.
Sounds like an incoming rocket. We better get out. Okay. On Saigon's waterfront, people lost their common sense and swarmed on board ships, hoping to make the journey down a river that had already fallen under the control of the communists. Soldiers began to destroy or change their identity cards. In old Saigon, there was always someone to sell a boat ticket to nowhere or a new identity. Such were the final moments of blind panic. Personal survival first. The lack of concern for the weakest and the helpless was never more apparent. Many senior officers and politicians had already left. This naval vessel, trying to run the gauntlet, was later sunk. 2 miles away, through the smoke of battle, the first column of communist tanks was nearing the Bin Hoa Bridge, the northern approach to Saigon. Word of the surrender began spreading, and soldiers returned from the city's defence perimeter to shed weapons and uniforms. There were few commanders left. Most had talked or bought their way onto the American evacuation. A handful of government tank crews and troops lingered at their positions, unaware of how fast the communists were advancing. One soldier was to die at this spot within the hour, after hearing the surrender broadcast. With the panache of a General Patton, the first North Vietnamese tank swept into Saigon. The men from the jungle had arrived. The last will and testament of Ho Chi Minh was being fulfilled. Though stricken with fear, the people of Saigon tried to react as if they all felt this was liberation. And the conquering tanks burst straight into the presidential palace. For the fourth time in a month, the presidential palace had new occupants, but these had come to stay. From start to finish, Operation Ho Chi Minh had lasted just 51 days. As we approached the palace, a communist officer came out carrying the flag of the old regime. There was no shortage of standard bearers for the Provisional Revolutionary Government. Inside, General Minh, president for only 36 hours, awaited the communist generals.
When did you first contact the National Liberation Front?
Stamping on the flag of the defeated army, the communist troops symbolically raised their own. It was time for President Minh's farewell to the palace, a man who had no option but to surrender Saigon or risk its destruction. Near the Benoit Bridge, there was evidence that some South Vietnamese troops had put up a fight and knocked out communist tanks. A soldier we'd filmed an hour earlier was one of the last to die. As the palace surrendered, the first Viet Cong reached Trudeau Street, delirious with joy. For the first time in 20 years, the face of Ho Chi Minh was on display. In the final moments of the war, some of the North Vietnamese tanks were destroyed, but such incidents scarcely delayed the communist effortless advance. There were civilian casualties, people who had been caught in the crossfire of a tank battle, but overall Saigon escaped lightly. South Vietnamese attempts to block roads with lorries were a failure. These were simply brushed aside or set alight. By the end, South Vietnam's air superiority had disappeared. Any planes which lingered over Saigon were shot down by missiles. To no one's surprise, many troops in the Communist Expeditionary Force weren't sure of how to get to central Saigon. The people of the capital, now to be renamed Ho Chi Minh City, willingly guided their new masters.
This was our car. We started off the morning with the Union Jack. The Union Jack's still intact, but the car isn't. It was taken at gunpoint by a South Vietnamese army colonel, the man in charge of this sector of Saigon, and he was determined to die or to kill the North Vietnamese and communist troops who even now are advancing into Saigon. The car was a write-off because a North Vietnamese, a communist tank, ran right over it. This is all that's left.
3 divisions of North Vietnamese were pouring into the capital, but they overlooked one factor: appalling traffic jams. It was a new experience for the highly disciplined communist troops. They hadn't realised that the tidal wave of humanity sweeping alongside them into Saigon largely consisted of looters who had raided a granary. Most were South Vietnamese deserters. The defeated army did a striptease en masse, leaving their incriminating uniforms behind. Tons of weapons, rifles and equipment were collected in heaps by student volunteers. Millions of dollars worth of war supplies, much of it fresh from the United States to replace earlier losses. The American policy of Vietnamization had been swept into the dustbin of history. For the victors, these were heady moments. Through their superbly coordinated offensive and the unexpected collapse of Saigon's forces, they'd turned the already discredited Paris peace agreement into a worthless piece of paper. Peace, yes, but now on their terms alone. After the weeks of hysteria in Saigon about a possible bloodbath, it was heartening to see the Southerners trying to understand the conquering Northerners. Boy did meet girl. Generally, the troops were extraordinarily well-behaved and shy. No one had expected such friendliness after the takeover. But then the measure of the communist victory was so complete that their forces and cadres could afford to be lenient. Street urchins selling the emblem of the Provisional Revolutionary Government did marvellous business. It seemed prudent to fly the new flag ourselves on our hired car, because there was no way of getting official papers. On the main roads leading from the capital, there were huge traffic jams, too much for the student militia to handle. Completely spontaneously, without hindrance, thousands of people began returning to their homes. South Vietnam's own down-to-the-countryside movement was underway. Highway 4, leading southwest from Saigon, was littered with the debris of a defeated army. 3 South Vietnamese divisions disappeared in and around Saigon, leaving many of their vehicles. They ran out of fuel. A whole regiment had jumped out of its boots and melted away, the soldiers returning to their villages. Hoa Binh, peace had come. The countryside itself in these early post-war days was strangely deserted, as if farmers were staying at home. So great was the rush back to the Delta that Highway 4 was frequently blocked. By now, the communists were ordering people to return to their villages all over Vietnam. Yet another North Vietnamese armoured unit found itself blocked by traffic, this time a long way from home in the middle of the Mekong Delta. Hanoi's arm was indeed long, but there was little fighting for the Delta. It fell into line as Saigon surrendered. The big towns in the Delta, like My Tho, were quickly back to normal as returning refugees poured off the buses.